Welcome, fellow seekers of history's shadows. Before we journey into the candlelit chambers of medieval Georgia, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Whether you're tucking in for sleep in Tbilisi, winding down in Wellington, or finding a quiet moment somewhere between, I'm grateful you've joined me here. Tonight, we'll unravel the whispered secrets of Georgian queens who brewed rose-petal remedies to heal body and spirit. Recipes born of faith, folklore, and the healing warmth of a hearth. As we trace petals from palace gardens to monastery apothecaries, you'll glimpse a world where science and superstition danced beneath stained glass windows. If these gentle voyages into history's hidden corners resonate, please subscribe so you never miss our next descent into the past's soft glow. Now, settle back, let the fragrance of rosewater drift through your thoughts, and allow our story to guide you toward peaceful dreams. The first light of dawn cast rosy fingers across a rugged caravan track, skirting the edge of the Black Sea. A column of mule-drawn wagons wound between pine-clad hills and salt-scented waves, each laden with baskets brimming full of freshly picked Rosa gallica petals. At the forefront strode Tamar, a wiry courier whose duty it was to shepherd this precious cargo north into the Georgian highlands. Her keen eyes, still half closed against the morning haze, scanned the horizon for bandits or stray wolves. The mules plodded steadily, their hooves kicking up dust, tinted the colour of rosewater. Occasionally, Tamar paused to tuck stray petals back into their wicker embrace, amlia, a short blessing in Old Georgian, as she tied each basket closed. Villagers, roused by the rumble of wheels, peered through shuttered windows, noses lifted to catch the first breath of the caravan's floral perfume. Somewhere beyond the next bend lay the fortified monastery, where the petals would be distilled into therapeutic essences, remedies that queens would later swathe in silken cloth and carry to ailing courtiers. But first there was the long road ahead, one of steep ascents, bracing sea breezes and whispers of ancient trade routes that connected Byzantium's rose gardens to the hilltop labs of Tbilisi. Each petal Tamar carried was a promise of calm and cure, threaded with stories of faith, folklore, and the soft power of a queen's remedy. Mid-morning light sparkled on the pebbled banks of a slow river tucked between lush meadows and the dark pine slopes beyond. Tamar guided her caravan to a humble wooden quay, where Father Georgi, a monk from a nearby riverside priory, awaited with shared provisions. He greeted her with a creased smile, offering freshly baked barley loaves and a flask of tart rose-petal syrup distilled just last season. As the mules drank from woven troughs, Tamar sank onto a sun-warmed stone and broke bread, the syrup's rosy tang dancing on her tongue. Georgi brushed dew-beaded moss from his cassock and described how the river's mineral-rich waters enhanced the potency of rose essences. He gestured toward a simple copper alembic beside the quay, used by novice brothers to test small experimental batches. Over chipped wooden cups, they discussed the king's demand for more potent healing salves to soothe battle-scarred knights returning from frontier skirmishes. Tamar listened, her mind mapping the route ahead, over steep ridges, through shadowed passes, to the monastery's towering walls. As the sun climbed, she loaded the wagons with fresh water skins and a small casket of the priory's own rose-infused tincture, a gesture of thanks and a token to share with the Queen's court apothecary. The mules stretched, shaking loose tufts of hay, while the monk blessed their departure with spode prayers. With baskets restocked and spirits lifted by fragrant replenishment, Tamar lifted the lead mule's reins. The road beckoned once more, petals safe and hope renewed for the cures they carried. By midday, the caravan reached the foothills of Kanati Pass, where jagged limestone cliffs loomed overhead and a thin trail zigzagged toward the clouds. Tamar tightened her grip on the mule's reins, feeling the earth slope sharply beneath her leather boots. Each step upward brought cooler air, and the distant trill of choughs echoing off stone walls. Wild roses, their petals paler than those in her baskets, clung to cracks in the rocks, a reminder that even in harsh terrain life could flourish. Tamar paused to refill a small bladder with clear mountain spring water, pouring a few droplets onto her temples to ward off heat and fatigue. Behind her, caravan guards, a pair of broad-shouldered sergeants in chainmail, paused to rest their halberds against a rocky outcrop, exchanging tales of border patrols near the Caspian frontier. Listens politely. Tamar listened politely, then offered them handfuls of rose petals to chew, the sweet bitterness reviving their spirits. As shadows lengthened across the pass, she adjusted her cloak against a sudden breeze, watching mists swirl around the next bend. Each flower-laden basket felt heavier now, the weight of petals matched by the weight of expectation. These blooms would soon become salves for fevered nobles and tinctures for weary pilgrims. A distant bell from the monastery chapel far below rang clear, guiding Tamar's resolve like a lighthouse for sailors. With one last swallow of spring water, she urged the mule onward, determined to navigate the steepest switchbacks before dusk. As the sun dipped behind craggy peaks, the silhouette of the monastery of St. George emerged against a blood-orange sky. Moss-clad stone walls rose from terraced gardens, crowned by onion-domed towers that caught the fading light like embers. Tamar's caravan rumbled along the final stretch of cobblestone, each wheel click echoing in the cool dusk air. Monastic bells tolled the evening vespers, their sonorous peals weaving through the clatter of hooves and the soft bleat of mules. At the gate, two robed brothers stood sentinel, lanterns swinging from leather straps and casting warm pools of light on the flagstones. Tamar halted her lead mule and offered a deep bow, lifting a basket of crimson petals toward them in silent greeting. The elder brother, his hood shadowing kind eyes, nodded and waved her onward, ushering the caravan into a courtyard fragrant with lavender and rose. Novices hurried between shuttered windows to set out copper stills and earthenware jars, their breath visible in the chill that settled as night fell. Tamar felt a hush descend, a sacred pause between world-weary journey and ritual preparation. Soon these petals would steam in alembics, their essences drawn out by flickering hearth fires, ready to become the healing rose waters beloved by queens and commoners alike. For tonight, though, Tamar allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, inhaling the mingled scents of stone, incense, and gathering blooms. In that hushed twilight, the promise of restoration felt as palpable as the first cool breeze of evening. Under the silver glow of a full moon filtering through high-arched windows, the monastery's alchemy hall brimmed with hushed activity. Copper alembics of varying sizes glinted atop stone hearths, their spouts draped with strips of wool to catch fragrant condensate. Tamar stood beside Brother Mikhail, the monastery's master distiller, as he gently coaxed steam through a coil, releasing the pale pink essence of Rosa gallica into waiting flasks. The air was thick with warmth and the gentle hiss of simmering rosewater, mingling with incense from a nearby censer. Candlelight danced on shelves lined with leather-bound manuscripts, ancient recipes penned in faded ink, their margins scrawled with prayerful notes. Tamar carefully placed baskets of freshly gathered petals on a wooden table, ready for the next batch. Mikhail spoke in low tones, explaining how nocturnal temperatures slowed the distillation, preserving delicate aromatic compounds prized by the royal court. Outside, the muffled, hulling toll of the midnight bell reminded them of the night's sacred rhythm: work, prayer, rest. Tamar nodded, her fatigue softened by the ritual's quiet precision and the soothing scent enveloping her. As each flask filled drop by drop, she labelled them with charcoal scratches: Queen Tamara's essence, distilled 15th July. Knowing these vials would soon travel to palace chambers, where weary nobles awaited their gentle curative touch. In that still hour, amid glowing hearths and rustling silks, the ancient art of rose alchemy felt timeless, a bridge between earth's fleeting bloom and the healing grace of a medieval queen's wisdom. Sunlight filtered through tall, stained glass windows, painting the polished marble floor in muted hues of ruby and amber. At the heart of the royal palace, the Queen's private apothecary chamber lay behind carved oak doors, inlaid with silver vines. Today, Tamar stood before the velvet-draped dais, where Queen Rusudan, resplendent in sapphire brocade trimmed with pearls, presided over her court of healers. A silk-clad steward announced Tamar's name with measured courtesy, and she stepped forward, clutching a leather-bound scroll of rose-petal tincture recipes. The Queen's jade eyes studied the delicate calligraphy as chambermaids placed copper bowls of steaming, rose-infused broth on low tables. Courtiers in crimson and gold murmured softly, their velvet robes whispering against the floor. Rusudan raised a slender hand, beckoning the court apothecary master, Master David, to present his latest distillation. He knelt, unveiling a crystal vial glowing faintly pink. This, the Queen declared, her voice steady as the marble underfoot, shall form the heart of our new healing salve for my ladies in waiting. A hush fell as David offered the vial to Rusudan, who turned it thoughtfully in her gloved palm. Tamar's own scroll felt suddenly heavy with promise, each petal-laden recipe a testament to her journey. Outside the chamber doors, palace grooms paused in gilded bridal hands, and distant fountain waters tinkled in the courtyard. Here, in the marble hall, faith in roses and royal mandate converged. The ancient art of brewing petals was no mere pastime, but a solemn duty to soothe flesh and spirit alike. After the Queen's decree, David guided Tamar deeper into the apothecary wing, an alcove lined with alabaster shelves bearing jars of exotic spices, fragrant woods, and vials of precious oils. In the center stood a massive bronze mortar and pestle, its surface etched with alchemical symbols. The chamber hummed with muted anticipation as David explained how the Queen insisted on personally inspecting each stage of preparation. He scooped rose petals first, their satin texture brushing the mortar's edge, then added pinches of imported saffron and shards of beeswax from the palace apiary. Tamar watched as he drizzled golden honey into the blend, his practiced hands coaxing the mixture into a smooth paste. Light from a single oil lamp flickered across the rose-red pulp, revealing streaks of saffron orange weaving through the petals. "The Queen believes," David whispered, "that the mortar's metal amplifies the remedy's potency, especially when inscribed with prayers." He traced a Latin invocation around the rim, murmuring each word with reverence. Tamar felt the air thicken with expectancy. Even the chambermaids paused their hushed tasks to observe. As David passed the pestle to Tamar, she pressed down, feeling the paste yield beneath her palm. A tactile communion with centuries-old tradition. Each rotation of the stone bowl released the alchemy of scent and color, binding royal authority and monastic wisdom in a single salve. By the time the paste shone like polished marble, Tamar knew this was more than medicine. It was a tangible promise from queen to subject, hope crystallized in fragrant form. Midday sunlight filtered through latticed windows into a curtained chamber just off the royal dais. Here, Sir Levan, a scarred veteran of the gory frontier, knelt before Queen Rusudan with a blood-tinged bandage wrapped around his forearm. David and Tamar entered, carrying a silver salver lined with rose and saffron salve warmed by a crackling brazier. The Queen's jade eyes softened as she gestured for the trial to begin. Tamar dipped a carved ivory spatula into the fragrant mixture, its hue a soft blush, threaded with golden saffron, and gently spread it across the knotted tissues of Sir Levan's wound. The knight winces at first, then, as the salve's cool moisture soothed burning flesh, David murmurs a quiet prayer, invoking the mortar's inscription and the Queen's blessing. Courtiers peered through velvet curtains, murmuring admiration for the remedy's smooth texture and lingering rose aroma. Tamar noted how the paste adhered without stinging, the beeswax and honey binding petals into a protective seal. After a moment, Rusudan rose and approached. her gloved hand extending to lift the knight's arm for closer inspection. Under her scrutiny, the salve gleamed like faintly polished marble, the skin beneath already losing its angry redness. Sir Levan bowed deeply to both queen and apothecaries, gratitude shining in his weary eyes. As David wrapped the arm in a clean linen cloth, Tamar caught the queen's approving nod, a silent acknowledgement that this ancient rose remedy had passed its most crucial test. In that chamber of soft light and hushed awe, science, faith, and royal will converged in a single act of healing. Late afternoon light streamed through high-arched windows into the palace's inner corridor, where delicate echoes of laughter and silk-draped footsteps signaled the presence of the Queen's ladies in waiting. A polished oak table stood against a frescoed wall depicting saints and roses, intertwined, laden with neatly labelled flasks of rose salve and small linen packets of dried petals. Tamar and Master David arranged the evening's allotment, 1 flask and 2 packets per lady, while a court usher, clad in emerald velvet, prepared scrolls detailing proper usage. The Queen had decreed that these nightly applications would soothe fatigue, restore luster to pale cheeks, and calm restless minds before bed. As each vial clicked shut with a silver cap, Tamar slipped a folded note beneath the stopper, inscribed in elegant script, "By the grace of Queen Rusudan, may these petals bring you restful dreams." The usher carried the first tray down the corridor. A chorus of whispered thanks floated back as the door closed. David watched with satisfaction as Tamar added a final flourish of dried rosebuds atop each packet, a fragrant reminder of palace gardens at dawn. Through a side window, the spires of the royal chapel glinted in the waning sun, and distant bells tolled the hour of vespers. In those quiet moments, the Remedies' journey felt complete, not merely an apothecary's task, but an act of care, woven into the daily lives of gentlewomen, whose loyalty sustained the court itself. With trays emptied and heart lightened by purpose, Tamar prepared to replenish supplies for the morrow's ritual. As twilight deepened, the Queen's private garden salon glowed under paper lanterns swaying in a gentle breeze. A low marble fountain murmured beside carved benches draped in rose-patterned cushions. Here, Queen Rusudan convened her inner circle, Master David, Tamar, and 2 trusted ladies-in-waiting. Plush tapestries depicting blossoming vines enclosed the courtyard, and fragrant steam rose from bronze censers filled with rose-petal incense. The Queen unrolled Tamar's scroll of recent test results, knight's wounds healed, court ladies sleeping more soundly, and traced each entry with a slender finger. "Your work honors my mother's legacy," Rusudan murmured, voice soft as the petals at their feet. David nodded, his velvet robes catching lantern light, and presented a small dossier detailing new experimental blends: rose lemon balm for fever, rose mint water for headaches. Tamar offered her thoughts on sourcing rare bergamot from Western markets, suggesting gentle adjustments to distillation times. The ladies-in-waiting sampled chilled rose mint sachets, closing their eyes at the soothing aroma. Rusudan raised a goblet of rose-infused wine, toasting to unity of crown and craft. Outside, nightingales began their nocturnal song, harmonizing with distant bells. In that lantern-lit haven, science and sovereignty intertwined as Rusudan planned wider distribution of her queenly remedy to border strongholds. As the council dispersed, Tamar lingered, inhaling the heady rose scent and committing each detail to memory. This was where political will, monastic wisdom, and royal care coalesced into a single vision. A kingdom bound by petals and peace. Long before sunrise, the palace rose terraces lay swathed in mist, dew beads glistening like tiny lanterns on petals of Rosa gallica. Garden stewards moved in hushed procession, their wicker baskets lined with soft linen to cradle each bloom. Nino, the head gardener appointed by Queen Rusudan herself, knelt among rows of cultivated bushes, shears glinting in the faint starlight. Each cut was deliberate, snipping only fully opened flowers whose fragrance reached its peak at first light. The air carried a delicate perfume, mingling rose and damp earth, as nightingales trilled their final lullabies. Behind Nino, 3 novice gardeners in simple tunics followed her rhythm, pausing to press petals between folded cloths and check each bud for blemishes. A pair of white doves roosted on a nearby balustrade, their soft cooing a gentle accompaniment to the rustle of linen collars. As Nino filled the last basket, she whispered a blessing of gratitude for health, hope, and humble hearts. The harvest would soon be weighed and sent to the Alchemy Hall, but this sacred morning ritual, harvesting at the moment of dawn's first glow, ensured every petal held the purest essence of the Queen's garden. With the baskets laden, Nino signaled her team, and they retraced their steps along moss-carpeted paths toward the palace doors, the promise of healing carried in each velvet-soft bloom. When first light filtered through woven reed screens of the potting pavilion, the day's harvest arrived in heaps of silken petals. Here, under the vaulted wooden ceiling, Master Botanist Tamar took charge. She spread a fine linen cloth over a long bench and began sorting. Pale blush roses reserved for delicate rose waters, deeper crimson blooms set aside for more robust salves. Her practiced eye noted every nuance: petals with uniform hue, gentle fragrance, zero blemish. 2 novice apothecaries hovered nearby, each holding shallow bowls. At Tamar's nod, they tipped small handfuls of petals into tiered sieves to shake off residual dew. The younger apprentice, Mariam, leaned forward, inhaling a rose's scent and smiling at the soft sweetness that lingered. "Quality here," Tamar murmured, pointing to a cluster of pale gold roses cultivated near the palace apiary. "Thoughtful. These will yield the purest essence." As she worked, Tamar recited petal quotas for the day, her voice calm but authoritative. The sorted petals formed neat pyramids on the bench, blush for wine infusions, amber for ointments, deep red for tinctures. In a corner, a copper basin of clear spring water waited for a final aromatic wash. Each pile, meticulously graded, spoke of the Queen's precise standards. Every rose remedy a carefully calibrated promise of efficacy. By mid-morning, the pavilion floor was clean, the linen cloth replaced, and the ready petals set to journey into the Alchemy Halls awaiting alembics. As the sun peaked above the eastern ramparts, the Alchemy Hall's stained glass windows cast a rosy glow across copper alembics lined on stone plinths. Tamar oversaw the morning's distillation of the Aurora essence, filtered dawn water, steeped with pale blush petals from yesterday's harvest. Apprentice Mariam tended the flame beneath a large alembic, her eyes keenly watching the first trickle of distillate drip into a crystal receiver. Each drop, pale as liquid moonlight, carried the whisper of the garden's fragrance. Tamar moved between workstations, checking the seals on ceramic stillheads and moved reminders. Keep the heat gentle. Too fierce, and the rose's subtle notes will scorch. A second apprentice, Leven, held a parchment scroll listing batch weights and target yields, recording each milliliter as it filled small phials. The air brimmed with steam and the mingled scent of petals and dew. In a corner, a brass hydrometer floated in a flask, its reading guiding Tamar's thoughtful nod of approval. The ritual was both precise science and sacred rite. Petals meeting water, fire coaxing essence, hands translating nature's bounty into healing liquid. By the time the distillation ended, the hall was serene. Alembics hissing softly into silence, flasks aligned like rosary beads on a marble table. Tamar signaled completion, and Mariam gently corked each phial, their labels handwritten in Tamar's steady script. Aurora Essence, Batch 4, 3 August. These vials, destined for the Queen's medicinal stores, held the distilled breath of dawn itself. Late morning found the cool chamber of the winter cellar ready to receive the freshly distilled essences. Rows of oak shelves stood against vaulted stone walls, each slot carved to cradle glass phials upright. Tamar, Mariam, and Levan carried trays of aurora essence from the Alchemy hall, their footsteps echoing softly on flagstone floors. Tamar paused before an empty niche, wiping each vial's base with a linen cloth to remove condensation. She applied a small wax seal, embossed with the Georgian rose emblem, to every stopper, ensuring authenticity and purity. Mariam arranged the sealed files in order of batch number, while Levan affixed parchment tags listing date, distiller, and intended use: infirmary, apothecary, or royal kitchen. The trio worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the soft scrape of parchment and the distant drip of a stone fountain. Once the shelves were stocked, Tamar closed the cellar's iron-bound door and turned the massive key in its lock, a gesture signifying the end of one cycle and the promise of another. In the hush that followed, she traced a finger along the row of rose-colored bottles, each a vessel of dawn's fleeting magic captured in glass. These essences, stored at perfect chill, awaited distribution to the Queen's court, a promise of gentle healing in every drop. As they exited, Tamar inhaled the cellar's crisp air, content that today's harvest would nurture both body and spirit in the days to come. Before first light, the Alchemy hall's stone tables were strewn with disassembled copper alembic components, slender stillheads, serpentine coils, and bulbous receivers. Brother Arson, the monastery's chief engineer, moved among the pieces with methodical precision, his leather apron catching stray sparks from the nearby forge. He lifted each heavy copper section, inspecting joints for tightness and etching new calibration marks where years of use had blurred original inscriptions. Tamar arrived bearing baskets of graded petals, her steps echoing on the flagstones. Together they aligned the alembics in formation, smallest coil at the center, larger receivers flanking either side for later infusion runs. Arson tapped a mallet gently against copper, listening intently, listening for a clear ring that signaled metal free of cracks. Then, with Tamar's guidance, he fitted linen seals soaked in olive oil around every joint to ensure steam wouldn't escape. Outside the arched windows, dawn's rosy glow crept across the courtyard, casting alabaster columns in warm light. The assembled apparatus stood like an arcane orchestra, poised to transform simple petals into potent elixirs. As one, engineer and apothecary stepped back, inhaling the faint metallic tang blending with the soft scent of rose. In that hushed moment, the silent promise of distillation magic hung in the air, an alchemical rite that would draw nature's hidden secrets into glass. With the alembics assembled, the next critical step was mastering the fire's heart. Brother Arson and Tamar descended to the wood-fired hearth beneath the largest still. Flames licked the copper base, and Arson carefully added split logs of oak, their resinous scent mingling with stray petals that drifted in on Tamar's cloak. She held a bronze ladle of spring water and coaxed it around the alembic's foot, steam as it met the hot metal, an age-old test for even heat distribution. Meanwhile, Tamar consulted a parchment chart of ideal temperature ranges. Too low and petals would languish. Too high and precious aromatics would be lost to scorch. Arson adjusted iron grates with a hooked rod, channeling the flame's intensity to narrow hotspots. As coals glowed amber, Tamar inserted a brass thermometer through a small port, its mercury rising gachi. She signaled to Arson, who fine-tuned log placement until the reading steadied at the alchemist's golden ratio just under the boiling point of water. Sweat beaded on both their brows from the combined heat of fire and hall. Above them, delicate copper tubes began to warm, preparing to funnel the forthcoming rosewater distillate into waiting flasks. In that flickering torchlight, technical skill and botanical wisdom danced together, each flame-fed decision guiding nature's essence toward liquid form. By mid-morning, after hours of vigilant stoking and calibration, the first blush-colored droplets began their descent from alembic spout to crystal receiver. Tamar and Brother Arson stood side by side, breath held as that slow drip cadence, Nature's heartbeat filled the hall with expectant hush. Each drop captured the distilled soul of Rosa gallica, pale pink liquid glimmering like morning dew. Tamar adjusted a small wooden wedge beneath the receiver to steady its angle, ensuring no precious drop escaped. Arson, noting every sound, dipped a gloved finger into the emerging stream, then inhaled the delicate aroma, floral yet earthy, an olfactory promise of healing. Nearby, apprentice Mariam recorded the flow rate and initial volume on a slateboard, her chalk scratching in measured strokes. Tamar signaled to Arson, and he gently increased the fire's intensity to quicken flow without compromising clarity. Steam curled around their shoulders, carrying a heady perfume that seemed to pulse with life. Soon, the fluted receiver brimmed, and Arson traded it for an empty flask, sealing the neck with wax while Tamar penned, Batch 1 Rosewater Elixir 4th August, in neat script. As the next receiver clicked into place, they shared a quiet nod. This successful first run would set the standard for all future distillations. In those delicate drops lay the culmination of centuries-old ritual and innovation, distilled hope ready to soothe body and spirit alike. Late afternoon light filtered through high windows, illuminating the workbench strewn with bowls of dried chamomile, mint leaves, and lavender buds, each destined to blend with the day's rosewater distillate. Tamar stood before a shallow copper cauldron, pouring precisely measured batches of the pale pink elixir over the herbs, their surfaces rippling as steam curled skyward. Brother Arson reheated small coals in a brazier beneath the cauldron, ensuring the mixture reached a gentle simmer. The room filled with a layered perfume, floral from the rosewater, soothing from chamomile, and cool from mint. Tamar dipped a wooden skimmer into the swirling infusion, lifting sprigs of lavender as she tested color and consistency. Balance is key. Too much mint dulls the rose's warmth. Apprentices gathered, eyes wide, as she demonstrated the fold and strain method. Folding a linen filter into a cone, she ladled the blended liquid through, leaving behind spent petals and herbs. Each filtered ounce slipped into alabaster jars, their opaque surface protecting light-sensitive compounds. Tamar labeled them Rose Mint Calm and Lavender Rose Repose, noting recommended uses, a cooling compress for fevers or a nighttime compress for migraines. As the last jar filled, she sampled a drop on her fingertip, floral sweetness kissing her tongue before a cooling mint finish. Brother Arson nods in approval, his engineering precision matched by her botanical artistry. In those dusky hours, the union of distillate and herbs transcended simple concoction. It became a layered remedy, a testament to the monastery's alchemical mastery. As dusk settled, Tamar carried a tray of freshly blended jars into the monastery infirmary, a cool, quiet chamber, lined with cots and hushed prayer. Here, Brother Levin, the infirmarian, awaited with 2 patients, a feverish novice and an ailing elder monk. Tamar explained each remedy's purpose, the rose mint calm for lowering temperature, and the lavender rose repose for soothing restless minds. First, she dipped lint cloth into the rose mint calm, wrung it until it glowed with pale pink moisture, and pressed it gently against the novice's flushed brow. The cloth's coolness elicited a soft sigh as fevered beads of sweat receded. Brother Levin murmured a soothing psalm, his fingers steady as he supported the cloth. Next, Tamar prepared a light compress, linen soaked in lavender rose repose, folded into a small pillow and tucked beneath the elder monk's head. As the lanterns flickered, the monk inhaled deeply, his brow smoothing as tension slipped away. Tamar observed both patients for signs of relief, the novice's pulse slowing, the elder's breathing deepening. Satisfied, she noted results on a vellum chart. Temperature dropped 2 degrees in 20 minutes. Restlessness eased within the hour. Brother Levin bowed his head in gratitude, acknowledging the remedy's success. Outside, church bells tolled Compline hours, and the infirmary sank into contemplative hush. In that moment, science and compassion converged. Rose essences distilled, infused, and tested, bringing tangible comfort to bodies and souls alike. Tamar left the chamber with quiet pride, knowing these trials would refine future batches and honor the Queen's healing legacy. Before dawn's first light, the monastery's stone choir reverberated with the sonorous chants of morning matins. Cloaked figures in grey robes knelt in the nave, their breath visible in the chilly air as they intoned psalms in Old Georgian. At the altar, a silver basin brimmed with that day's rose petals, plucked at peak bloom. Brother Georgie, senior among the chanting monks, lifted each petal between thumb and forefinger, blessing them with the sign of the cross and murmuring, "May this bloom, born of earth's grace, bring comfort to the suffering." The petals, now hallowed by liturgy, were swept gently into wicker baskets lined with linen. Tamar stood just beyond the glow of candelabras, observing the ritual's solemn cadence. She felt the charged hush settle over each petal. The alchemy of faith as integral as the art of distillation. When the final hymn faded, Georgie passed the baskets through a carved oak gate to the alchemy hall, where their sanctified oils would be drawn. Outside, the first sunbeam pierced a rose window, scattering prismatic light over the cloister. In that radiant moment, prayer and petals merged, a sacred prelude to every remedy that followed. At midday, the marble fountain in the chapel courtyard became a focal point for consecration rites. Sunlight danced on its carved Rose of David motif as Brother Michael, incense thurible swinging, circled the fountain thrice. Kelimmakachlang, he murmured prayers for purification, while Tamar held a silver ewer filled with rosewater distillate. As Michael's chants rose, she poured the essence into the fountain's bubbling basin. The petals floating there glowed like suspended jewels. Pilgrim visitors paused in their prayers, dipping fingers into the rose-infused water and crossing themselves. Nearby, 2 novice friars arranged pewter cups for distributing the holy water to the infirm. Tamar watched the water's surface ripple, feeling the blend of liturgy and science, the rose's scent now sacramental. Once the rite concluded, Michael nodded to Tamar and she ladled consecrated water into small flasks sealed with wax. These vials, bearing the chapel's blessing, would travel with wandering pilgrims. As bells tolled the hour, the courtyard's hush deepened, and Tamar tucked flasks into her satchel, each drop a prayer made liquid. As evening vespers began, the cloister's vaulted walkways filled with soft hymns. Tamar joined the procession behind Brother Levan, who carried a carved wooden aspergillum dipped in a bronze font of rosewater. Each drop that fell from the instrument shimmered in the torchlight as they passed beneath vaulted arches painted with floral motifs. At key points near the infirmary door, the apothecary's workshop, and the Queen's private chapel, Levan paused, sprinkling rose water while Tamar recorded prayers uttered by the chanting monks. The fragrance, faint yet persistent, settled on stone and wood, infusing the space with a sense of calm. As the final hymn faded, Levan offered the font to Tamar, and she stepped forward to sprinkle a final blessing upon the empty benches of the cloister, sealing the day's rituals. Monks and novices alike bowed their heads, inhaling the rose-scented dusk. In those twilight corridors, the line between prayer and remedy vanished, each sprinkle an act of both devotion and healing promise. At the stroke of midnight, the alchemy hall transformed into a vigil chapel. Candles made from rose-petal wax flickered atop stone pillars, casting elongated shadows on the walls. Tamar and Brother Arson knelt before an altar draped in rose-patterned cloth, each holding a lit candle. The flame's gentle grax blended with the distant gol of the midnight bell. Brother Arson intoned a solemn prayer, invoking the Virgin's healing intercession, while Tamar released handfuls of dried rose petals into a bronze brazier, their hiss echoing like whispered Amen. The smoke curled upward, carrying the aroma of rose and resin. Their vigil lasted until the first cock's crows, each moment steeped in hushed expectation. As the final petition ended, Tamar dipped her candle into a bowl of rose-infused oil, anointing the brazier's rim, a symbolic gesture sealing the night's prayers into the coming day's remedies. With bowed heads, they extinguished their flames, leaving only the petal candles to gutters softly in the pre-dawn gloom. Just as the first dawn light crept into the courtyard, Brother Georgi led a final benediction at the cloister's columns. Monks formed a semicircle around a low stone table bearing bronze bowls of rose petal oil and flasks of consecrated rosewater. Tamar positioned beside him, holding scrolls of blessings inscribed in gold ink. As Georgi intoned the Benedictus, each monk dipped a brush into the oil, marking a small cross on the foreheads of novices and apothecaries alike. Tamar then handed flasks to awaiting lay brothers, who would carry them to distant infirmaries and village shrines. The aroma of toasted petals and incense mingled with morning mist, infusing every breath with quiet reassurance. With the final Amen, Georgi closed the ritual, and the procession dispersed down the cloister walk, petals and potions in hand, gifts of grace moving out into the world. Tamar watched them go, knowing each blessing carried the power of ritual and Rose's healing promise to far-off pilgrims and courtiers alike. In that tranquil dawn, the sacred rites and prayers woven into every remedy found their rightful place in both monastery and realm. As first light crept through gauzy silk curtains, Tamar entered the Queen Consort's private infirmary, a chamber of muted pastels and embroidered pillows. Soft lantern glow lingered in wall sconces, illuminating a row of low cots draped with rose-patterned quilts. Each bed held a patient, noble ladies recovering from fatigue, a court poet suffering from exhaustion, and a young page with fevered cheeks. Tamar carried a silver basin of rosewater salve, its scent drifting like a gentle promise. She paused at the first cot, where Lady Eleni stirred, her jasmine-scented hair fanned on silk. With a practiced hand, Tamar applied a cool rose-petal compress to the lady's forehead, the soft cloth whispering against smooth skin. Lady Eleni, tension melting from her features. Moving along, Tamar stopped to adjust the linen pillow of the poet, sprinkling crushed petals for inspiration's return. Beyond the last cot lay a gilt screen painted with garden scenes, offering privacy and a hint of calm. Outside, the hush of servants preparing the royal breakfast mingled with distant fountains. In these careful dawn rituals, every salve, sachet and whisper carried the Queen Consort's intent to nurture body and spirit in the sanctuary of rose-scented rest. By mid-morning, sunlight filtered through carved lattice, spotlighting a low table set with alabaster bowls of rose mint tea and honeyed rose syrup. Tamar prepared a delicate elixir for Lady Tamarina, who lay reclined upon silk cushions embroidered with the royal crest. The lady's cheeks bore the pale cast of recent illness, and her eyes fluttered as she sought relief. With reverent care, Tamar poured steaming tea into a porcelain cup, its rim gilded and inlaid with tiny rose motifs. She added 2 spoonfuls of rose syrup, stirring until the liquid shimmered. Handing the cup to Lady Tamarina, Tamar explained, "This blend will soothe throat dryness and calm your nerves before your midday rest." Lady Tamarina sipped slowly, the floral warmth spreading through her chest. A distant lute melody drifted from the adjoining salon, and Tamar closed her eyes briefly at the comforting harmony. As the lady's hands relaxed around the cup, Tamar noted the change. Colour returning to pale lips, tension easing from slender shoulders. She jotted dosage notes into a leather field journal, an intimate record reserved for the Queen's closest attendants. In this sunlit chamber, the Queen's rose remedies transcended mere medicine. They were personalized acts of care, steeped in protocol and affection. At the hour of the sun's zenith, The infirmary grew hushed as Tamar prepared a rose-petal pillow for the queen's youngest lady-in-waiting, Maro, whose restless slumber troubled the court. She scattered a layer of fresh pale blush petals onto a square of fine linen, nestling a small sachet of lavender and rosebuds at its center. As Maro lay her head down, stationary harpist Agassi began a soft midday lullaby in the adjacent chamber. The music wove through arched doorways, drifting into the infirmary like a warm breeze. Tamar smoothed the pillow's edge and whispered instructions. Breathe deeply. Count each petal's promise of calm. Maro's eyelids fluttered, and within moments, her breathing eased into steady rhythm. The harp's gentle plucking harmonized with Maro's exhalations, and Tamar allowed herself a brief smile. This was the alchemy of sound and scent, guiding the soul toward rest. Around them, sunlight painted moving patterns on tiled floors, and even the candles flickered in time with the melody. In that midday lull, the infirmary became a sanctuary of stillness, where rose petals and lullabies converged to cradle a weary heart back to peaceful sleep. Late afternoon, the queen consort herself entered the infirmary, her sapphire cloak trailing behind her like a ribbon of twilight. Queen Rusudan moved quietly to the bedside of her lady, observing the pale petals strewn on the pillow and the slow rise and fall of Maro's chest. Tamar knelt beside the bed, presenting a scroll of updated remedies. Rose honey pastilles for Maro's cough, a cooling rose lemon wash for feverish hands. Rusudan's gaze was intent, her voice low as she inquired about dosages and expected recovery. Tamar explained each ingredient's provenance, honey from palace hives, lemon from southern orchards, and how they balanced the rose's warming nature. The queen nodded thoughtfully, her jeweled hand brushing a stray petal back into place. She then conferred briefly on matters of discretion. These private formulations were not for public knowledge, but for her inner circle alone. As candles flickered and evening shadows deepened, Tamar felt the weight of trust bestowed by Rusudan, a rare honor for an apothecary. When the queen rose to depart, she paused to caress Maro's hair and offered a whispered blessing. The royal visit ended as quietly as it had begun, leaving Tamar with renewed purpose, to ensure every rose remedy lived up to the queen's exacting expectations and heartfelt care. As twilight deepened into dusk, Tamar returned to the infirmary's small desk, a carved oak table scarred by ink and candle wax. She unrolled a vellum ledger and transcribed the day's treatments. Compresses applied, elixirs sipped, pillow infusions taken. Each entry noted patient name, remedy name, dosage, and response, their neat columns a testament to care and precision. A single lantern cast a warm pool of light, and the rose-water-scented wick flickered with each breath of air. Once the ledger was complete, Tamar sealed it with red wax, stamped by the royal crest, ensuring the record's confidentiality. She gathered her supplies, empty bowls, used linens destined for laundering, and vials ready for cleaning, and placed them in a basket. Outside, palace corridors echoed with the soft rustle of evening gowns and distant lute strains. Tamar paused at the infirmary door, inhaling the lingering rose aroma and allowing herself a moment of quiet pride in her work. With a gentle turn of the brass latch, she stepped into the corridor, baskets in hand, ready to deliver used linens for cleansing and return home. Behind her, the infirmary's door closed softly, leaving behind a space restored by petals, prayer, and meticulous care. As dusk settled over the thatched cottages of the Kakheti countryside, smoke curled from stone chimneys into the cool evening sky. Inside one humble home, a circle of village women, grandmothers, midwives, and young mothers, huddled around a low hearth. A large clay pot of rose-petal infusion simmered over a crackling fire, its gentle scent mingling with the aroma of baking cornbread. The eldest, Grandma Katia, lifted a wooden ladle and poured a small cup for each woman. In hushed tones, they exchanged stories of rosewater cures passed down through generations. A dab behind the ear for teething children, a draught at dawn for weary field hands. As they sipped, Katia plucked a pale pink petal and held it aloft by its stem. Thoughtful, the rose is our guardian, she intoned. Its tears chase away evil spirits and soothe the fevered soul. The women nodded, their faces lit by hearth flames and faith. Outside, lantern bugs flickered among wild rose bushes, and the distant bleat of goats lulled the conversation into comfortable silence. In that simple cottage, the rose's lore lived on, not as courtly science, but as cherished tradition woven into everyday life. By candlelight, midwife Tamuna prepared her signature rosewater bath for a newborn in a neighboring hut. The room was lined with woven mats and embroidered blankets, soft lamplight reflecting off polished wooden walls. She filled a shallow wooden basin with warm water, then sprinkled in petals she'd picked that morning from wild rose hedges. As the infant cooed wrapped in swaddling cloth, Tamuna hummed a lullaby in old dialect, her voice soothing as the steam rose. Grandmother Katia assisted, rebreathing the vapor over the child's tiny chest to clear newborn congestion. After a gentle sponge with the rosewater, Tamuna dabbed the baby's temples with a few drops, murmuring a blessing against colic. The mother watched, tears of relief glistening as the child relaxed into peaceful slumber. Outside, an owl hooting softly, and the scent of rose drifted through an open window. In that simple rite, centuries of flower lore and maternal care converged, the rose's gentle properties offering comfort from first breath onward. Under a canopy of stars, shepherd Zurab returned to his stone hut after tending sheep on moonlit hills. His wife, Layla, awaited him with a small flask of rose-petal tincture to soothe his wind-burned throat. She filled a wooden cup with cool spring water and introduced 3 drops of the deep red elixir, its scent sharp and sweet. Zurab sipped, the cool liquid sliding down his throat, easing rawness from months of biting winter wind. As Layla tucked him into a straw-stuffed bed, she told him of ancient lore, how shepherdesses once carried rosebuds in their cloaks to ward off night chills and nightmares. In the flickering lamplight, Zurab nodded, warmth returning to his cheeks. Outside, a lone wolf's distant howl reminded them of the wild lands beyond. Yet within their cozy hut, Rose's quiet magic bridged the gap between rugged frontier life and the gentle touch of home. By midday, the village square buzzed with market activity. At a stall painted with rose motifs, herbalist Koba arranged bundles of dried petals, jars of rose-infused honey, and small sachets of crushed blooms. A brass basin at his elbow held rose-petal tea steeping in warm water. Passers-by paused to inhale the aroma, drawn by its sweet allure. Koba plucked a fresh petal, offering it to a skeptical merchant who crunched it between his teeth and smiled at the gentle bitterness. The herbalist extolled Rose's virtues: digestive aid, skin tonic, restful sleep. A mother inquired about a remedy for her child's rash. Koba demonstrated a poultice blend, rose paste mixed with oat flour and a touch of olive oil, pressing it into a soft cloth for her to take home. Nearby, children chased pigeons around the fountain, their laughter mingling with haggling voices. In this bustling scene, rose lore thrived, not in grand courts, but at the heart of communal life, weaving ancient wisdom into daily commerce. As twilight deepened, villagers gathered around a large communal hearth in the central longhouse. A fireside storyteller, Avtandil, recounted the legend of Queen Tamar's rose garden, how a single rosebush, planted by a grieving queen, bloomed through snow to grant hope. He passed around a bowl of rose-petal wine, the warm ruby liquid sweet on the tongue. Flames danced on his weathered features as he spoke of petals that whispered secrets to those who listened. Women nodded in understanding. Men sat silently, cups in hand. In the smoky glow, rose lace ribbons hung from wooden beams, and a woven tapestry depicted roses entwined with royal crest. Childlike awe shimmered in the villagers' eyes. Here the rose was more than medicine. It was myth, memory, and communal bond. As Avtandil's voice softened to a whisper, the hearth crackled, and the villagers leaned in, hearts warmed by both fire and tale. In a timber-framed outpost, perched on Georgia's northern frontier, the air was thick with tension and campfire smoke. Soldiers, fresh from skirmishes with mountain clans, clustered around a rough-hewn table where Tamar and Master David had set up a modest testing station. Wooden bowls held rose saffron salve, tinctures in small flasks, and jars of rose-petal wine. Sergeant Koba, arm wrapped in stained linen from a recent wound, let Tamar apply a thin layer of salve to the injured flesh. He runt, at first, cold wax meeting warm skin, but then relaxed as the subtle sweetness soothed raw pain. Nearby, Corporal Anna drank a thimbleful of rose-petal wine, her brow furrowed by headache. She paused mid-sip, eyes widening at the gentle warmth that spread through her temples. David recorded each response in a soot-dark notebook. Sergeant Koba, 30% pain reduction in 10 minutes. Corporal Anna, headache eased in 5. As dusk fell and watchfires flared, word spread among the garrison that these queenly remedies offered genuine relief. Soldiers exchanged wary glances, then hopeful nods, trading flasks of tincture like prized spoils. Even hardened veterans murmured thanks to the apothecaries, their voices hushed but sincere. In that raw frontier night, Rose alchemy proved its mettle, not just in polished court chambers, but in blood-spattered tents, where healing meant survival. Back within the monastery's cooled infirmary, Tamar and David convened with Brother Levan and a visiting royal physician, Dr. Mikkel, to analyze the frontier data. The chamber glowed under a cluster of oil lamps, illuminating a large parchment chart pinned to the wall. Tamar pointed to rows of symbols, dots for dosages, crescents for time to relief, crosses for adverse reactions, while David translated raw numbers into preliminary conclusions. Dr. Mikkel, distinguished in dark velvet and bearing a bejeweled scalpel at his belt, leaned forward, stroking his pointed beard. He drew a clipboard of parchment and nodded thoughtfully. The salve's analgesic effect rivals imported opiates, he murmured, and the wine's mild sedative properties are remarkable. Brother Levan crossed his arms, his steel-blue habit reflecting lamplight. He added reports of incense smoke inhalation trials, where rose-infused prayers had eased breathing in asthmatic novices. Together, they debated dosage adjustments, increasing saffron for potency, reducing beeswax for faster absorption. Tamar sketched revised recipe ratios in the margin, her quill dancing across vellum. Outside, the toll of the night bell drifted through arched windows, marking the hour of study and prayer. In this sanctified clinical forum, where monastic devotion intertwined with empirical rigor, each rose remedy was refined for the Queen's final approval, ensuring that every cure born of petal and press met the highest standards of faith and science. On the manicured fields outside Tbilisi's fortress walls, the annual spring tournament pulsed with colour and cheers. Amid banners of red and gold, Tamar and Master David set up a small pavilion draped in rose-embroidered tapestries. Word had spread that the Queen's famed rose salves could soothe bruises and sprains earned in joust and melee. As armoured knights marched by, Lady Mariam of Kartli, an enthusiastic sponsor, invited the first volunteer, Sir Georgian, who'd taken a lance-glancing blow to his shoulder. Tamar applied a thin smear of rose saffron salve, rubbing it gently into the swelling. He flexed his arm, his jaw slackening in surprise at the cool relief. Nearby, a chorus of onlookers murmured as David offered small vials of rose wine tonic to spectators complaining of festival fatigue. Each sip brought a rosy warmth that eased weariness without dulling the mind. A herald blew his trumpet to call attention, and Lady Mariam raised her goblet, enthusiastically exclaiming, "By these petals we ride stronger." Tamar noted Sir Georgi's reaction, mobility restored in under 10 minutes, and David chalked it on his slate. Bruising reduced 50%. Around them, merchants and ladies-in-waiting lined up, eager for samples. In that festive trial by sport, the rose remedies proved their worth. not only battlefield healers, but also tonic for body and spirit amid courtly spectacle. That evening, the Grand Palace Hall glittered with torchlight and polished mahogany tables set for a banquet. Tamar presided over a velvet-draped tasting table lined with rose-petal confections, distilled tonics, and candied petals crystallized in honey. Queen Rusudan had summoned her most discerning courtiers, poets, philosophers, and ladies-in-waiting to sample and critique each formulation. Lady Elaine, draped in emerald velvet, first tasted a rose-honey nougat, her eyes closing at its soft chew and floral aftertaste. Next came a tiny crystal of candied rose, its sugar glass texture dissolving into pure aroma. Philosophers sipped the chilled rose-lemon tonic, debating its subtle balance of sweetness and tang. Each guest recorded notes on fine vellum: aroma, celestial; texture, sublime; or thoughtful; body, enlivened; spirit, calmed. Tamar moved among them, offering fresh samples and clarifying recipe tweaks. More saffron here, less almond oil there. When a skeptical dignitary declared the tonic annoyed, too gentle, Master David discreetly swapped his sample for a stronger infusion, prompting an approving nod. By night's end, the tasting panel unanimously endorsed 3 top recipes for court use. The Queen's seal of approval would soon appear on each jar and flask. In that ornate hall, Rose Remedies transcended medicine, becoming artisanal delights worthy of royal palate and prestige. In the Queen's private study, lined with towering bookcases and flickering candelabra, Tamar and David prepared their comprehensive report. A broad oaken table held stacks of parchment, frontier data, infirmary logs, tournament observations, and banquet tasting notes. Tamar dipped her quill into rose-scented ink and penned the executive summary: efficacy rates, recommended dosages, and distribution plans for palace, monasteries, and border garrisons. David illustrated key charts, hand-drawn bar graphs showing pain reduction percentages, and line graphs of tasting panel preferences, annotating each with careful script. As they worked, the door opened quietly to admit Queen Rusudan, her sapphire gown trailing across the mosaic floor. She reviewed the report's highlights, pausing to admire David's elegant visuals and Tamar's concise analyses. Warmly, "Your diligence honors Georgia's heritage," she said, her voice warm yet precise. She then endorsed the document with her signet ring, a rose-shaped seal pressed into crimson wax. With that act, the report became royal decree, authorized for mass production, distribution to courtiers and common folk alike, and dedication in the Great Council Hall upon the next full moon. As Rusudan withdrew, Tamar exhaled with relief and pride. Their trials, tastes and toils, petal, flask and parchment, were at last woven into policy. In that quiet study, the culmination of their work sealed the rose's place as Georgia's gentle healer for generations to come. Carpets of deep crimson and gold carpeted the Grand Hall of Ani, the ancient Armenian seat of princes. Tamar accompanied Prince Vakhtang as Georgian envoy, presenting crates of rose salves and vials of distilled essence to the Armenian sparapet, commander. Hosts in embroidered silk tunics received them under vaulted cedar beam ceilings scented faintly of frankincense. The sparapet, a broad-shouldered figure in chainmail trimmed with filigree, gestured to a low table draped with damask. Tamar laid out rose and saffron ointments, explaining their royal provenance and efficacy in battlefield healing. He sliced open a pouch of dried petals, releasing a rush of sweet perfume that drew curious murmurs from assembled nobles. A court physician tested a drop on his wrist, its cool relief earning a nod of approval. In turn, the sparapet offered a flask of Armenian pomegranate infusion, suggesting its tannins might bolster the rose tonic's astringent qualities. Scribal secretaries recorded every detail in Armenian script, as candles flickered and shadows danced on carved stone walls. Tamar and the sparapet negotiated recipe exchanges, a dozen rose salve jars for a quintet of pomegranate tinctures, plus future collaboration on winter-proof storage. When the evening conclave ended, both sides bowed in mutual respect. bouquets of exchanged samples in hand, a pact of petals and politics bound across mountain passes. At dawn's edge, the sprawling Tbilisi bazaar teemed with merchants from Persia, Georgia, and beyond. Colourful awnings fluttered above stalls of silks, spices, and ceramics. Tamar moved among them, escorted by a Persian trader named Khalid, whose turban and jewelled dagger marked him as a man of means. She presented small vials of pure rosewater, labelled in Georgian script, to a circle of elderly Persian apothecaries seated on woven rugs. Their copper scales and mortar and pestle sets gleamed in early sunlight. One elder lifted a vial, turning it gently to catch the rose-tinted liquid's sparkle. He added a few drops to saffron-threaded milk in a porcelain bowl, stirring until the mixture glowed like sunrise. Over shared tea, the apothecaries revealed their secret infusion of rose with damask plum kernels to ease winter colds. Tamar scribbled notes on wax tablets, then offered a demonstration, layering rose petal sediment for clearer distillate in their own stills. Crowds paused to watch, lured by the mingled scents of rose, cardamom, and fresh bread. When the session ended, merchant Khalid negotiated barter, a chest of damask plums for 3 caskets of rosewater, while Tamar exchanged cordial bows and promises of future shipments across the Silk Road. In the coastal city of Trebizond, where Greek marble met Black Sea spray, Tamar presented rose remedies to a delegation of Byzantine envoys. They convened in an open courtyard, flanked by classical columns and vine-draped pergolas. A Byzantine proto-spatharios, robed in ivory and purple, gestured to a low mosaic table bearing alabaster jars of rose-petal balm and amphorae of distilled essence. Tamar demonstrated the balm's elasticity, stretching a small dab into a pliable ribbon, then applied it to a frayed leather gauntlet, which instantly softened and regained suppleness. Whispered astonishment rippled through the envoys as they ran fingers along restored leather. Next, she poured rose essences into shallow bowls, inviting them to smell for notes of citrus, earth, and floral nuance. The lead envoy, a scholarly figure with silver curls and a scroll case at his belt, nodded appreciatively and presented a codex of Byzantine apothecary formulas. He highlighted a recipe blending rose with myrrh for sacred chrism and suggested integrating Georgian distillation to clarify their own oils. As seagulls cried overhead, Tamar and the proto-spatharios inscribed a memorandum on vellum, binding their collaboration in ink and wax. With sunset gilding the courtyard, they exchanged amicable embraces, a union of East and West through the shared language of petals and potency. High in the Taurus foothills, the Seljuk Sultan's summer palace shimmered white against alpine pines. Tamar and Master David, invited as exotic guests, entered a marble pavilion whose columns were carved with crescent moons and climbing vines. The Sultan's Grand Vizier, clad in silk brocade, watched as Tamar arranged a jewel display, copper censers of rose and sandalwood incense, and small alabaster bowls of Rosa garwood oil. She lit a censer, the fragrant smoke spiraling upward, and explained how Georgian rose blended with native woods soothed courtly tensions during long council sessions. David poured droplets of the oil onto perfumed stones, demonstrating its use as a portable anointing balm for traveling dignitaries. The Sultan's physicians, arrayed on cushioned divans, inhaled the scents and anointed their temples, murmuring approval in Persian. A court calligrapher recorded the recipe in elegant Nastaliq script, noting the precise petal-to-wood ratio. From ornate latticed windows, mountain breezes carried the mingled aromas through the palace gardens, where peacocks preened on marble fountains. The vizier, pleased by the lightness to prized Chinese incense, suggested forging trade ties to supply Rosa garwood blends for diplomatic gifts to the Abbasid Caliphate. As the afternoon sun gilded mosaics, Tamar and David sealed the new accord with a rosewater toast on filigreed silver trays. In that cool pavilion, petals and politics entwined once more. Rose Remedies steering alliances beyond the Caucasus. Back on Georgian soil, at the bustling port of Poti, where the Riani River met the Black Sea, Tamar oversaw the final stage of export. Sturdy crates lined the dock, each branded with the Queen's rose emblem. Dockworkers loaded sealed alabaster jars of rose saffron ointment, glass vials of distilled petal essences, and woven baskets of dried petals onto flat-bottomed vessels bound for Constantinople, Alexandria, and Venice. Tamar checked each crate's inventory: 20 jars of salve, 30 vials of pure rose water, and 10 bundles of pressed petals. She affixed wax seals and attached parchment manifests in Georgian and Greek, Arabic and Latin, ensuring customs clearance along diverse shores. Master David directed stevedores as they hoisted crates with rope slings, sweat glistening on their brows in the humid sea air. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the clang of chains and shouts of sailors. As the last chest slid aboard, Tamar dipped her finger in rosewater and pressed a final blessing on the ship's prow, a ritual borrowed from coastal fishermen to ward off storms and guarantee safe passage. Behind her, masts swayed, ready to bear Georgia's rose remedies across turquoise waves. In that sunlit harbour, the journey of petals, beginning in royal gardens and monastic labs, set sail toward distant courts and common folk alike, carrying with it the promise of healing, bound by petals and diplomacy. Sunlight streamed through leaded windows onto the long oaken tables of the monastery scriptorium, where Tamar and Brother Nino, the senior illuminator, pored over ancient vellum folios. Each page glowed with hand-painted rose motifs, crimson petals curling around gold leaf borders, and recipes penned in meticulous calligraphy. Tamar traced her finger along faded Georgian script, describing a rose and mint tonic for migraines, marveling at the marginalia, tiny sketches of petal-studded alembics and perfumed goblets. Brother Nino, brushes balanced behind his ear, explained how successive generations of monks had added annotations in different inks, refining proportions and adding rare ingredients like marjoram and myrtle. The air smelled faintly of ground pigments, crushed lapis lazuli and vermilion, mixed with lingering rosewater from Tamar's cloak. As they deciphered an especially obscure passage on nocturnal distillation, Tamar's eyes lit. It detailed a method to harvest dew on petals by moonlight, yielding an essence prized by Queen Rusudan herself. Brother Nuno dipped a fine brush into a pot of red ochre and carefully retouched a miniature rose in the margin, bringing its petals back to vivid life. Each restoration felt like reviving a piece of living history. As bells chimed midday, Tamar carefully closed the folio, knowing these illuminated manuscripts held not just recipes, but the alchemical wisdom of centuries, bridging monastic tradition and royal patronage through ink, pigment, and petal. In a secluded chamber off the main cloister, Tamar and Brother Arson convened to create a special royal compendium, an illuminated codex of rose remedies destined for Queen Rusudan's personal library. The chamber's walls were lined with scroll racks and drying frames, while a low window offered a view of the palace gardens. On a central lectern lay a blank vellum folio, its surface primed with chalk and ready for gold leaf. Tamar read aloud the selected rose salve recipe, precise ratios of saffron, beeswax, and distilled rose water, perfected through clinical trials. Brother Arson dipped his brush into a bowl of liquid gold, carefully applying leaf to ornate initials, R for Rosa and S for Sanguis, which gleamed like morning dewdrops. Tamar sketched marginal vignettes, a mule caravan at the Black Sea, a distillation alembic steaming in moonlight, and a Queen's Court apothecary at work. Each scene captured a chapter's essence in miniature form. As Arson laid down the final gold leaf flourish, Tamar applied rose-tinted pigment to floral borders, her strokes precise and reverent. The codex became a fusion of science and art, its luminous pages reflecting the kingdom's reverence for rose alchemy. When finished, they carefully closed it, knowing its weight, both physical and symbolic, would remind future readers of the petals, prayers, and politics behind every remedy. As dusk fell, Tamar prepared the finished compendium for clandestine transport to the palace library. In the candlelit cloister passage, she wrapped the codex in silk to protect its gold leaf, then placed it in a locked chest emblazoned with the Queen's rose crest. Two novice brothers, faces half lit by torchlight, stood ready to escort the chest through winding corridors. Tamar led the way, lantern in hand, pausing at each heavy oak door to whisper, a prayer of safe passage. The air was cool and silent, broken only by distant echoes of chants and the click of sandals on stone. At the palace gatehouse, the captain of the guard, a stoic figure in steel breastplate, received the chest with a curt nod and led his men to load it onto a handcart, bound for the royal archives. Tamar watched until the cart disappeared into the darkened courtyard, her heart both proud and anxious. In that guarded twilight, the compendium's journey mirrored the rose's own path. From secret petals in shadowed gardens to illuminated knowledge in the Queen's hands. As she turned back toward the monastery's warm glow, Tamar knew the codex would soon catch candlelight in the palace's silent reading rooms, its golden pages preserving the alchemy of roses for generations to come. By morning light, the palace library's grand oak doors swung open to reveal endless rows of leather-bound tomes. Tamar, accompanied by the captain of the guard, entered with the rose-crested chest. At the center stood Master Iowene, the venerable royal librarian, his silver beard brushing the embroidered hem of his emerald robes. Tamar carefully unlatched the chest and lifted the silk bundle, laying it on a reading desk carved with grapevine motifs. Ioanne's eyes widened as she unveiled the illuminated compendium, its gold leaf initials catching sunlight like dew. He traced a fingertip along the R of Rosa, then opened to the moonlit distillation vignette, his breath catching at the miniature portrayal of alembics under starlight. As he turned pages, Tamar described each chapter's structure, noting how recipes were organized by remedy type and season. Ioanne nodded, deep lines of scholarly approval creasing his forehead. He murmured, "This will become the crown jewel of Her Majesty's collection," and beckoned his scriptorium apprentices to prepare a protective display stand. Nearby, a small gathering of court scholars craned their necks to glimpse the codex's floral borders. With solemn ceremony, Ioanne draped a velvet cloth over the lectern and secured the compendium with brass clasps, ensuring both reverence and security. In that hushed library, centuries of monastic art and royal patronage converged. A single book destined to illuminate future generations on the gentle science of rose alchemy. That afternoon, the scriptorium annex came alive with the scratch of quills. Tamara, invited back as guest instructor, oversaw a dozen scribes and illuminators replicating key pages from the royal compendium. Each worked at a long bench under oil lamps, vellum sheets stretched tight and propped on angled desks. Tamar circulated with a silver pointer, guiding the apprentices in replicating the delicate rose border patterns and instructing on the precise mixing of rose petal pigments. Young Arsenia, a promising illuminator, held a brush, trembling with anticipation as Tamar showed how to blend crushed ruby petals with egg white to achieve translucent pink hues. A scribe named Levan copied the Latin and Georgian texts below, his quill flowing in steady loops. Occasionally, Tamar paused to correct letter forms or demonstrate a gold leaf application, tapping the gold gently with a bone folder to achieve perfect adhesion. The room hummed with focused energy. The aroma of rose petal ink mingled with beeswax from drying seals. By day's end, Several exquisite duplicates lay stacked on a side table, ready to be bound for distribution among regional monasteries. As the final candle guttered low, Tamar gathered the copies and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the artisan's skill. In that creative crucible, the compendium's wisdom and the gentle art of rose alchemy spread beyond palace walls, ensuring petals and their promise would bloom across the realm. At dawn's first glow, the hidden door beneath the palace's eastern rose arbor swung open to reveal Queen Tamar's private laboratory, a sanctum steeped in floral fragrance and soft candlelight. Polished blackstone counters bore rows of alabaster mortars filled with crushed petals, and silver alembics glinted like watchful eyes. Tamar, invited at the Queen's personal behest, steadied herself as lady-in-waiting Marika led her through lattice screens to the heart of the chamber. There, Queen Tamar herself stood before an immense alabaster fountain, its basin brimming with rosewater, distilled under a full moon. The Queen's emerald gown shimmered with every movement, her circlet of spun gold set with a single dewdrop pearl. With regal poise, she lifted a crystal phial containing the elixir of regal bloom, a blend of rose, saffron, and a secret root known only to the royal apothecary. She explained how this potent remedy, developed from centuries of trials, could restore vigor to ailing monarchs and heal wounds that no ordinary salve could touch. As sunlight pierced stained glass petals overhead, Queen Tamar uncorked the phial and let its heady aroma wash over the room, an olfactory declaration of her rule's benevolent power. In that private laboratory, ritual and remedy merged under royal guidance, forging a legacy destined to outlive dynasties. Under a silvered moonbeam filtering through the chamber's rose-patterned lattice, Queen Tamar convened her midnight council, a secret gathering of nobles, healers, and scholars sworn to protect the elixir's recipe. Seated on velvet pillows around a low onyx table, they formed a circle around a single glowing lamp. Tamar carried the elixir of regal bloom in a crystal carafe, its liquid surface shimmering like captured starlight. Each council member bore a scroll, Marika with the ingredient list, Master David with clinical trial data, and a visiting Armenian physician with fermentation notes. The Queen poured small portions into silver cups and passed them in turn. Each sip elicited hushed exclamations, warmth spreading through chest, clarity of thought, gentle lifting of fatigue. As the lamp's flame flickered, Tamar spoke softly of the kingdom's needs, how the elixir must be guarded, yet shared sparingly to heal those in true peril. A noble lord pledged to conceal the formula within his fortress archives. The physician offered encrypted marginalia in Armenian, and David promised a disguised cipher woven into monastic manuscripts. In that moonlit conclave, allegiance was sealed, petals, politics, and secrecy entwined to ensure the elixir's power served the realm and no other. Weeks later, word reached the palace of a wounded rebel leader, Prince Georgian of the Svan Highlands, ambushed and left for dead in bitter winter snows. Bound by compassion and strategy, Queen Tamar dispatched Tamar, the apothecary, to administer the elixir of regal bloom. By torchlight, in a snow-dusted tent, Tamar found Prince Georgian pale and fevered, bloodied bandages loosely wrapped around his side. Marika held a brazier of rose saffron herbal tea, while Tamar uncapped a small crystal vial. She placed a drop on the prince's tongue, its warmth provoking a shudder of relief. Then she gently applied elixir-infused salve to his wound, massaging in concentric circles to encourage circulation and prevent infection. Prince Georgi's breathing eased, colour returned to his cheeks as warmth spread beneath his tunic. Marika whispers a prayer as Tamar poured tea into a wooden cup and guided it to his lips. Outside, snowflakes swirled around tent flaps as guards kept vigil. In that fragile night, Rosa's legendary remedy forged a fragile peace, healing heir to past conflict and binding rebel to crown in gratitude. As Georgi's eyes fluttered shut in restorative sleep, Tamar packed up her silver tools, knowing this act would echo in the annals of Georgia's unity, petals as instruments of both mercy and marriage of hearts. On a crisp autumn morning, courtiers and monks gathered in the sunlit courtyard of Gelati Monastery to witness the annual blessing of the elixir of regal bloom. Queen Tamar's silver-carved reliquary, holding the crystal phial, was carried on velvet cushions by 4 hooded novice brothers. Tamar, granted honour as chief apothecary, led the procession behind incense-bearing clergy, the air thick with myrrh and rose-petal smoke. Chanting monks in sapphire robes intoned psalms under ornate arches, carved with vine motifs. At the high altar, adorned with garlands of fresh Rosa gallica, Abbot Georgi poured a few drops of the elixir into a chalice of consecrated water, stirring it with a gold-plated rod. The mixture shimmered like liquid dawn. Tamar watched as the abbot raised the chalice high. The assembled bowed heads caught the morning light. With that blessing, the elixir was renewed for another year of healing, its potency affirmed by faith and ritual. As the choir sang a gentle anthem, Tamar allowed herself a quiet smile, knowing this sacred rite wove the rose's gentle power into both body and spirit across the kingdom. Years later, in a quiet antechamber of the royal palace, an aging Tamar handed the original elixir's crystal phial to Princess Rusudan, Queen Tamar's chosen heir. The young princess, draped in dawn-hued silk, accepted the reliquary with reverence, her fingers brushing the silver filigree. Tamar recounted the elixir's journey, from palace lab to battlefield tent, from midnight council to monastery blessing. She described each safeguard, the secret ciphers, the encrypted marginalia, the annual rite at Gelati, entrusting the princess to protect both recipe and ritual. Princess Rusudan nodded, eyes bright with determination. She vowed to uphold the rose's gentle legacy. As a final gesture, Tamar dipped a rose-twig pen into rose-scented ink and inscribed the princess's name beside Queen Tamar's in the royal ledger. With that signature, the lineage of rose alchemists passed seamlessly to the next generation. The sun filtered through stained glass rose windows, casting prismatic petals across the marble floor, an omen of continuity. In that solemn transfer, the elixir's promise endured. Petals, politics, and piety bound in a living legacy that would bloom with each successive heir. Late summer's bloom in the royal rose gardens was pierced by the distant clatter of hooves and muffled drumbeats echoing across the low hills. Tamar, summoned from the Alchemy hall, climbed the marble stair to the terrace overlooking the palace walls. Below, couriers raced toward the gatehouse bearing hushed warnings. Mongol warbands pressed southward, razing villages in their path. The gardens, once meticulously tended, showed first signs of neglect. Unruly wild roses overtaking trimmed hedges, irrigation channels clogged with summer debris. Queen Rusudan's steward, pale with worry, explained that guards were being redeployed to reinforce frontier fortresses, leaving only a skeleton crew to tend the blooms. Tamar felt her heart tighten. Without harvest, there would be no petals for salves, no rosewater for courts or infirmaries. She knelt among drooping blossoms, plucking a few still vibrant petals and tucking them into her tunic as precious relics. As the sun sank blood-red behind the fortress, the once vibrant gardens fell silent, their fragrance fading into uncertainty. In that dusk-lit moment, Tamar realized the empire's shifting fortunes threatened not only politics, but the very petals that had long symbolized Georgia's gentle healing power. Weeks later, the palace lay under siege. Flaming arrows arced over walls, and the Alchemy hall's copper alembics gleamed eerily in torchlight as Tamar and brother Mikhail prepared one final distillation. Supplies were dwindling. No fresh petals remained, only jars of dried petals stored for emergencies. Outside, the thunder of battering rams reverberated through stone corridors. Tamar worked with trembling precision, pouring the last reserves of petal fragments into a battered alembic, while Mikhail stirred charcoal embers to life. They distilled a pale amber essence, more fragile than rosewater, heavy with muted scent. With each drip, Tamar felt the weight of centuries slip away. As the final flask filled, she inscribed its label. Last harvest, 12th year of Rusudan's reign. Crash! A crash echoed as the outer gate splintered. Mikhail grabbed the flask and wrapped it in cloth. Tamar scooped remaining petal dust into pouches. Hand in hand, they fled through hidden passages beneath the monastery, trailing smoke and ash. Behind them, the alchemy hall's doors were wrenched open, the lingering rose aroma swallowed by chaos. In that desperate escape, Georgia's storied rose remedies passed into memory, captured only in Tamar's pouches and Mikhail's flask, relics of a fading golden age. Months passed. Tamar wandered in exile with a small caravan of scholars and artisans, seeking refuge in the coastal town of Batumi. The once proud rose recipe scroll lay hidden beneath layers of cloth in her satchel, its ink fading from damp sea air. She established a modest workshop in a ruined watchtower overlooking the Black Sea, salvaging what she could: broken alembic shards, dusty journals, and a single withered rose petal pressed between parchment. Local healers eyed her wares warily. Wild roses grew in hedgerows, but lacked the regal strain of palace blossoms. Tamar attempted to replicate the file distillation, but the flavor was insipid, the scent faint. Each failure weighed on her, a reminder that knowledge alone could not revive lost gardens. In quiet evenings, she gathered children of exiled families, reading aloud the once illuminated recipes, preserving petals' promise through oral tradition. As salt breeze carried stories seaward, Tamar vowed that one day, when Georgia's fortunes returned, those whispered verses would guide new gardeners to replant royal rose gardens. Until then, she and her small band guarded memory's fragile bloom, a legacy of scent and science awaiting rebirth on native soil. In a quiet Franciscan monastery near Venice's Grand Canal, Brother David, once a scribe in Georgia, ran a quill over fragile vellum in dim candlelight. He'd secreted the last copy of the royal rose recipe from Tamar's wrecked workshop, hoping to preserve it beyond Georgia's fall. Yet here, centuries of sea fog and damp had turned elegant calligraphy into smudged shadows. He paused mid-line, fingertips stained with pale pink ink, as the script blurred before him. Every word lost was a petal's promise gone, proportions of saffron, timing of distillation, sacred invocations, each vital to the elixir's power. Brother David dipped his quill into a tiny flask of rosewater, the scent faint but assuring, and breathed life back into a single rose motif in the margin. Outside, monks chanted vespers, their voices drifting through arched cloisters. He worked through the night, copying as much as he could onto new parchment, knowing some lines were already beyond recovery. When dawn's first glow filtered through stained glass, he carefully bundled the partial copy and concealed it beneath his habit. Though incomplete, it was the only surviving bridge between Georgia's lost gardens and a future resurgence. As the ferry bells began their mournful call, Brother David slipped into Venice's labyrinthine streets, clutching hope in ink and petal fragments, determined that even in exile, the memory of Rose alchemy would endure. Years later, the once grand royal gardens lay forgotten beneath tangled brambles and crumbling marble balustrades. One spring morning, a humble shepherd named Lally ventured into the overgrown courtyard, seeking firewood among toppled columns. There, defiantly blooming through cracked stone, stood a single Rosa gallica bush, its petals a vivid crimson against grey ruin. Lally knelt beside it, awe and sorrow mingling in her eyes. She gently plucked one dewy petal and pressed it between the pages of an old prayer book she carried, hoping to preserve its memory. The air felt charged, a whisper of ancient rituals, monastic chants, and royal blessings lingering in the breeze. As sunbeams pierced through broken arches, Lally whispered a simple vow. May this last rose herald a new beginning. She tucked the pressed petal into her satchel, along with a handful of seeds, determined to plant them in her village. Behind her, the palace silhouette soared like a phantom against the sky. Its gardens silenced, but not forever. In that solitary bloom lay the fragile hope that Georgia's rose alchemy, though nearly lost, might one day bloom anew in humble hands and fertile soil. In the grand reading room of Tbilisi's newly established imperial archive, sunlight filtered through tall sash windows onto rows of oak shelves. Dr. Elaine Tarknishvili, a pioneering Georgian historian, reverently withdrew a dust-covered folio bound in cracked leather, the last surviving copy of the Royal Rose Compendium. She carried it to a central table, alongside magnifying lenses and archival gloves. As she gently pried the cover open, pages of gold leaf initials and rose-tinted marginalia gleamed like sunlit petals. Handwritten notes in faded ink detailed the medieval distillation methods, complete with recipe ratios and prayerful invocations. Dr. Tarknishvili's colleague, Professor Mikhail Javakishvili, peered over her shoulder, adjusting his pince-nez spectacles. Together, they photographed each page on glass plates, an arduous process requiring long exposures and precise framing. Outside, the hum of railcars and telegraph wires symbolized progress. Yet here, time seemed suspended between past and present. When the final negative was exposed, Elaine let out a soft exhale. Centuries of monastic wisdom had resurfaced. She carefully closed the folio, her heart alight with anticipation. These recovered pages would form the foundation for a new revival of rose alchemy, melding modern chemistry with ancient art. In that hushed archive, the fragile thread connecting medieval queens to 19th century scholars was reforged, petals reborn in silver halide and ink. Months later, Ellen and Mikhail journeyed to the Imperial Chemical Institute in St. Petersburg, where Dr. Vasily Petrov, an eminent chemist, awaited their facsimiles. In a white-tiled laboratory, Petrov compared the medieval recipes against his modern distillation charts. He measured saffron and beeswax under precision scales, then assembled copper alembics modelled on the original illustrations. As brisk December air rattled lab windows, the team distilled a small batch of rosewater, monitoring temperature with mercury thermometers and logging pH levels in a leather-bound journal. Petrov's assistants titrated the essences, isolating volatile compounds and comparing their aromatic profiles via olfactory panels. Ellen translated marginal prayers from Old Georgian, ensuring the ritual invocations aligned with each processing step. When the final aromatic distillate wafted through the lab, floral yet distinctly complex, they knew the ancient formula had survived scientific scrutiny. Petrov raised a glass vial in salute. "Shah! To the wisdom of Georgian queens!" proudly. He toasted, voice echoing off ceramic tiles. In that fusion of philology and chemistry, medieval faith and modern methodology converged, setting the stage for Rose Remedies' 19th century renaissance. In spring's first warmth, Elena oversaw botanical trials in the Tiflis Botanical Gardens experimental plots. Rows of Rosa gallica seedlings, grown from seeds Lali had preserved, stood beneath glass cloches. Gardeners in smocks and straw hats tended soil enriched with monastery loam. Elena, notebook in hand, measured petal yield, bloom timing, and fragrance concentration. A visiting pharmaceutical investor, Countess Ekaterina Novikova, sampled crushed petals under a magnifying lens, noting their intense color and perfume. Together, they planted crossbred strains, grafting highland varieties onto lowland rootstock to enhance hardiness. By midday, bees buzzed among blossoms, and Elena harvested petals for pit distillation in a portable copper still. Mikhail and Petrov joined, recording chemical yields against garden metrics. As the steam curled upward, the air brimmed with promise. Ancient rose alchemy revived in horticultural science. At sunset, Countess Novikova committed funds for a dedicated rose research pavilion, inscribing her name on a marble plaque. In honor of Georgia's petal legacy, in that verdant garden, medieval queen's floral wisdom took root in modern soil, ensuring the rose's healing legacy would flourish anew across lands and labs alike. In the grand hall of the Paris Exposition Scientifique, rows of polished oak benches faced a raised dais draped in crimson velvet. Dr. Elaine Tarknishvili stood at a lectern beside a large easel, displaying hand-colored charts comparing medieval and modern distillate yields. Professor Mikhail Javakhishvili adjusted his tailcoat as he arranged polished glass samples of rosewater along a silver tray. The audience, distinguished French chemists, botanists and journalists, leaned forward as Elaine began in accented French. Mesdames et messieurs, behold the revival of Georgia's royal rose alchemy. She explained how 19th century scholars authenticated each recipe through archival photography and chemical assays, then demonstrated the fragrant clarity of the distilled Rosa gallica essence. Marie Delacroix, a renowned perfumer in a tailored gown of navy silk, approached to inhale a sample and proclaimed its aroma, une révélation florale. As exchanges of applause rose, Mikhail passed around small tongs holding sugar-crystallized rosebuds, their sweetness underscored by saffron notes. Journalists scribbled headlines about Byzantine petals reborn and science meets folklore. Outside, gaslights flickered along the Champs-Élysées, but here in that ornate Parisian venue, Georgia's rose heritage shone anew on the world stage, its petals bridging centuries and continents through scholarly rigor and sensory delight. Back in Tbilisi, the morning air was thick with anticipation as locals and dignitaries gathered before the newly constructed Tbilisi Rosewater Distillery. A polished marble plaque above the entrance bore Elene Tarknishvili's name and the date of its inauguration. Inside, gleaming copper alembics stood in neat rows, each linked by brass piping to glass receivers. Elene, dressed in a charcoal wool coat and rose-embroidered scarf, cut a crimson ribbon with silver scissors engraved with a rose emblem. Beside her, a local philanthropist, Baroness Eka Pirchkalava, poured the first distillate into a crystal decanter, the pale pink liquid catching sunbeams through tall windows. Couriers in silk uniforms lined up to receive their inaugural flasks, ready to distribute to pharmacies across the Caucasus. A master distiller, Georgi Beriashvili, adjusted flame under the central still, his soot-smeared apron contrasting with Elene's scholarly poise. As the first official batch filled amber bottles stamped Tbilisi Rosewater, the crowd erupted in cheers. Journalists snapped photographs with box cameras, capturing Georgia's revival of an ancient craft. In that bright new factory hall, where monastic wisdom met modern engineering, rosewater once lost to war and exile flowed again, promising wellness and economic vitality for generations to come. In a restored 19th century bathhouse nestled in the winding alleys of old Tbilisi, rosewater's legacy unfurls anew. Marble soaking tubs gleam beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with frescoed roses and vaulted brickwork. Steam curls from heated water infused with petals sourced from the Tiflis Botanical Garden's heirloom Rosa gallica vines. A line of spa attendants in crisp white tunics welcomes clients, offering chilled towels lightly misted with rose mint essence, formulated from medieval compendium ratios. One guest, wrapped in plush linens, reclines beside a marble fountain where rosedew water drips into alabaster bowls. The spa's master herbalist, Eka, guides a petal ceremony, sprinkling crushed petals across heated stones to release soothing aromatics. Gentle tinkling of copper bells signals each stage, cleansing steam, rose-infused scrub, and a final misting of lavender rose tonic. Clients inhale deeply, tensions dissolving as centuries-old tradition blends seamlessly with modern wellness trends. Outside, twilight softens the city's rooftop silhouettes. Inside, the air thrums with quiet rejuvenation, Here, the ancient remedy finds fresh purpose, nurturing body and spirit in a timeless embrace of scent and serenity. In a sleek laboratory tucked within Tbilisi's tech hub, scientists clad in lab coats and rose-emblazoned ID badges pioneer new cosmetic applications of Rosa gallica extracts. Glass benches hold graduated cylinders of translucent rosewater, amber-toned serums in pipettes, and white cream formulations in beakers. Dr. Nino Mysaradze, lead dermatologist, loads petal-rich distillate into a high-precision microencapsulation device, capturing volatile compounds within lipid spheres for controlled skin release. Her colleague, chemical engineer Levan, calibrates the device's temperature and pressure parameters on a touchscreen interface, displaying real-time particle size distribution. On nearby benches, a consumer testing panel samples a Gallic Glow face mist, noting its fine atomization and subtle floral finish. Each formulation batch is logged in a digital ledger, alongside pH, viscosity, and clinical trial results showing improved hydration and reduced redness. The lab's glass walls look out onto a green rooftop garden, where modern Rosa gallica cultivars flourish. As Nino reviews microscopy images of encapsulated petal vesicles, she chuckles. Ancient recipe wisdom meeting cutting-edge biotech. In that luminous lab, Rose's renaissance transcends spa tradition, propelling Georgia's rosewater into the forefront of global skincare innovation. High among the green slopes of the Caucasus Mountains, a boutique wellness retreat beckons with panoramic views and a holistic rosewater program. Timber lodges perch on terraced gardens, where rows of Rosa gallica bloom under alpine sun. Each morning, retreat guests gather on a stone pavilion overlooking mist-wreathed peaks for a rosewater sunrise yoga session. Instructor Maya guides gentle asanas, encouraging participants to spritz facial mists enriched with lavender rose dew distilled on site. Afterwards, they meander through dewy gardens to a cedarwood sauna, where rose petal steam infuses the cabin. Post-sauna, a petal potluck serves rose-infused herbal teas and light fare, rose honey yogurt parfaits, steamed dumplings drizzled with rose lemon syrup, and petal-studded fruit compotes. Retreat founder, botanist Nutella, leads midday workshops on distillation techniques, inviting guests to harvest petals under sun hats and feed them into copper stills. As dusk falls, a communal fire pit crackles, and guests recline on woolen blankets, sipping rose kaffir cocktails beneath the stars. Here, the ancient Georgian rose remedy transcends palace courts and labs, blossoming into an immersive journey of movement, scent, and nourishment, set against the timeless grandeur of mountain landscapes. Under the cavernous glass roof of the Frankfurt Trade Fair, Georgia's pavilions shimmered with rose-pink lighting and polished copper alembics on display. Executives from health, beauty, and beverage industries strolled past sleek counters offering samples of Gallic essence, rosewater tonics, and artisanal skincare serums. Dr. Nino Mysaradze and botanist Nutella stood ready in rose-emblazoned blazers, presenting interactive kiosks where visitors could virtually tour Tbilisi's distilleries and gardens. A German cosmetics buyer spritzed a mist of microencapsulated rose dew serum onto her wrist, murmuring approval at its fine atomization and lingering floral note. Nearby, a bartender demonstrated a rose-lemon mixer, pouring pink-hued cocktails into tall glasses garnished with candied petals. Press photographers snapped images of the crowd's delighted reactions, while trade journalists recorded quotes, "A marriage of ancient wisdom and modern science," one declared. At midday, the Georgian ambassador cut a ceremonial ribbon threaded with rose garlands, officially inaugurating export partnerships across Europe and Asia. As evening lights danced on mirrored surfaces, long queues formed for premium rose petal confections and limited edition collector's bottles stamped with the royal crest. In that global marketplace, the humble Rosa gallica had transcended its monastic origins, now coursing through international supply chains as a symbol of Georgian heritage and innovation. Back in Tbilisi, a once abandoned lot near the old city walls has been reborn as the Rose Revival Community Garden, where local schoolchildren, seniors, and volunteers plant heritage Rosa gallica varieties alongside vegetable beds. Under the guidance of horticulturist Acre and volunteer botanist Levan, children kneel on soil mats, gently placing young rose bushes into raised beds edged with reclaimed bricks from palace ruins. Each child receives a small flag stamped with the Georgian rose emblem to mark their plant. Seniors share stories of lost gardens, encouraging careful watering and weeding. A mural of medieval distillation scenes adorns a nearby wall, painted by local artists to connect past and present. At sunset, the community gathers for a petal harvest workshop. Eka demonstrates how to dry petals in solar dehydrators and later infuse them into communal batches of rose syrup lemonade. Neighbors sip the rosy beverage while planning weekly care schedules. The air fills with laughter and the soft rustle of leaves. In that urban oasis, ancient botanical wisdom and modern community spirit intertwine, ensuring that the rose's gentle legacy flourishes not only in laboratories and spas, but also in every hand that tends the soil of Georgia's living memory. Under vaulted glass ceilings in Tbilisi's National History Museum, a special exhibition titled Petals Through Time drew visitors to gleaming display cases. Each case housed artifacts, the last surviving medieval alembic, gilded recipe folios, and crystal vials of modern distillate, alongside 19th century glass plates. At the exhibition center stood a life-size diorama of a rose garden terrace, complete with bronze replicas of palatial distillation stills. Dr. Elin Tarknishvili, now curator of Georgian botanical heritage, welcomed guests, students, tourists, and dignitaries alike, explaining how rose alchemy fostered healing and diplomacy from Queen Rusudan's reign to today's cosmetic labs. Children pressed their noses to humidifiers, wafting gentle rose mint vapors, while scholars examined interactive touchscreens, tracing petal to potion workflows. A large video wall played reenactments of key chapters: dawn harvests, monastic prayers, battlefield trials, and spa revivals. Visitors marveled at how a humble bush had shaped Georgia's cultural and scientific identity. When Elaine unveiled the exhibition's crown jewel, a flawlessly restored crystal phial containing the elixir of regal bloom, echoed beneath the glass dome. In that curated space, the Georgian rose's story crystallized. Petals once distilled for queens, now distilled for collective memory, ensuring that the legacy of rose-based remedies would inspire generations to come. In the wood-paneled lecture hall of Tbilisi State University, an international symposium on ethnobotany convened under the banner Rosa Gallica, Culture, Chemistry, Continuity. Leading researchers from Europe, Asia, and the Americas gathered at a long mahogany table. Professor Maya Gelashvili presented a keynote on the genetic lineage of Georgian rose cultivars, displaying DNA phylogenetic trees on a large screen. Next, Dr. Nino Mizaradze discussed microencapsulation techniques that preserve petal volatiles for next-generation skincare, passing around sample vials of Gallic Glow serum. An Azerbaijani scholar shared fieldwork comparing local rosewater uses across Caucasus villages, highlighting Lali's community garden revival. Questions flew: how to balance traditional law with industrial scalability, how to protect biodiversity amid global demand. In the audience, graduate students took furious notes, plotting theses on rose essential oil yields and cultural transmission. As the panel adjourned to a poster session featuring illuminated manuscript facsimiles and modern chromatograms of petal compounds, collegial debates mingled with the clink of coffee cups scented with rose syrup. Under the hall's stained glass rose window, it was clear that the Georgian rose cure had transcended its origins. Now a dynamic research frontier, uniting history, science, and sustainable innovation. At the newly inaugurated Georgian Rose Research Institute, a cohort of young fellows gathered for orientation in a light-filled atrium fragrant with living rose hedges. Under a banner reading "Cultivating Tomorrow's Petals," Program Director Levin Berishvili addressed the group. Geneticists, cultural anthropologists, and chemical engineers poised to advance rose studies. Each fellow received a leather journal embossed with a stylized gallica rose and a small vial of heirloom seed. Levin outlined research tracks: agroecological resilience against climate change, integrated skincare biomedical applications, and digital archiving of oral rose lore from remote villages. Fellows toured climate-controlled greenhouses where Sentinel sensor robots monitored humidity for optimal petal yield, and pilot fermentation labs blending ancient tincture methods with bioreactor fermenters. Over lunch, they sampled rose-infused kombucha and talked career aspirations, reviving nearly lost petals and writing the next chapters of Georgian heritage. As they posed for a group photo among rows of budding bushes, the flicker of ambition in their eyes mirrored petals poised to unfurl. In that moment, the legacy of Georgia's rose cure passed decisively into future hands, where science, tradition, and youthful creativity would ensure the rose's healing bloom endured for centuries yet to come. Each June, Tbilisi bursts into rosy bloom for the International Rose Festival, a jubilant celebration weaving tradition, tourism, and scholarship. The city's central plaza transforms into a sea of stalls, draped in pink silks and garlands. Dr. Elena Taknishvili presides over the Hall of Heritage, where visitors admire century-old distillation apparatus alongside modern biotech displays. Nearby, master distiller Georgi Beryashvili hosts live demonstrations. Copper alembics steam under open tents as curious onlookers inhale the heady aroma of Rosa gallica. Performers in folk dress dance beneath archways of fresh petals, while culinary artisans serve rose-infused delicacies, dumplings drizzled with honey rose syrup and rose raspberry sorbet. Children run through sprinklers that mist rose mint water, laughter mingling with the scent of blossoms. Festival-goers attend panel talks on sustainable rose cultivation, and young researchers present poster sessions on aroma compound analytics. As dusk falls, lanterns shaped like rosebuds flicker across the square, and fireworks bloom in petal-shaped bursts overhead. In that vibrant fusion of past and present, Georgia's rose cure heritage pulses at the heart of community life, its petals now symbols of cultural identity, scientific innovation, and joyous renewal. Long after festival crowds disperse, the legacy of rose cure lives on in intimate, nightly rituals. In a softly lit bedroom overlooking Tbilisi's ancient rooftops, a young teacher named Maya prepares her bedside table. A crystal carafe of artisan rosewater, distilled that morning, sits beside a porcelain bowl of dried petals. Maya gently spritzes her pillow with rose mint essence, a modern echo of medieval lavender rose repose. She fills a warm basin with distilled aurora essence and leans over, inhaling its delicate fragrance as steam curls around her face. On a small stool, she arranges petal-infused eye pillows and rose honey throat lozenges, ready for tomorrow's dawn. With each careful motion, she whispers an old Georgian lullaby taught by her grandmother, words once sung in monastic alcoves. As she eases into crisp linens, the scent of rosewater mingles with nighttime breeze through an open window. Her last thought before sleep is gratitude for petals carried by couriers, distilled by apothecaries, championed by queens and scholars, now cradling her in gentle calm. In that personal ritual, centuries of rose alchemy converge at the threshold of dreams, ensuring Georgia's healing bloom continues to soothe body and spirit, one whispered breath at a time.